Well, a long-awaited review of the NDIS is recommending a big overhaul on what is an unsustainable system. Joining me now for more, Dr Martin Laverty. He's CEO of disability service provider Aruma, of course, a former NDIA board member. He helped set this whole thing up. So, big changes going back to pre-NDIS, that is, people on the lower end of the autism spectrum and with behavioural disorders, they're getting help, but it's at school, childcare level, not in what is a more expensive NDIS area. It's logical, it's going to happen. Any criticism here?
None. It's in fact what Aruma called for. I think the government has actually pulled off an extraordinary trifecta. They've been able to invite the states to contribute more to funding the NDIS. They've committed with the states to establishing a new funding program outside the NDIS that could deliver upwards of $3 billion per annum for foundational supports. And really importantly, there's no cuts to the NDIS. Tom, that feels like Christmas has come early, and the government, in fact the Federation, is really to be commended.
So the people that will drop out of the NDIS will do so slowly and they'll still get help, which is what the government's stressing. There's also this change, so automatic access is removed. What was happening, from what I'm led to believe, and what from people told us, was that doctor shopping, you get the right diagnosis, you're in automatically. Now it's about functionality instead.
When the NDIS was designed 10 years ago, there was to be an assessment on functional impairment and support needs. The review, not surprisingly, is saying let's go back to those principles so that it isn't diagnosis that drives your eligibility to the scheme, but rather support needs.
And diagnosis can be quite subjective, particularly around autism spectrum behavioural disorders.
We've seen the perverse outcome of eligibility to the scheme driving up diagnoses. What we're going to see in the future, and it's really important to emphasise, this will take some years, upwards of 5 years, to work through, is that those with significant disability will pass the eligibility test to the NDIS. And those with mild to moderate will have access to foundational supports outside the scheme. That's what was intended 10 years ago. And I'm so delighted that that's what the Federation has now signed up to.
And the point about people that care about this is not talking about let's pare it back for the sake of it, but so it can be sustainable and focus on those who need it the most. On the sustainability question, so you said, what an effort. I mean, I guess 2 notes of caution. They're doing it via GST handouts, and that's fine. It's not really your area. I'm not expecting you to have a hot political take. You're always welcome to have one. But the other aspect is 8% growth is still really high. This is still way more expensive than the scheme was going to be. So it needed reining in, but it's at a less ambitious scale, I suppose, even though it's still hard to pull off.
Well, Tom, you and I have discussed before that 8% is what any government program would hope for in growth allowance. Health inflation is about 4%. NDIS is going to be at double that. That's a very generous contribution of the taxpayer and of government. But the decisions that have been made through the NDIS review now guarantee that we're going to be able to work within that funding envelope into the future through the way in which access to the scheme is guaranteed for those with the most significant and profound disability, and supports elsewhere for those with mild and moderate.
Yeah, it's perhaps more sustainable, if not technically quite sustainable. The final question I have on this, when you look at the annual reports, the outcomes on increased employment amongst people with a disability haven't really been delivered. Should that be more of a focus? Because then you can actually justify a cost of the scheme, which was part of the original argument for it. It would basically pay for itself. For some reason, the employment outcomes haven't come so far.
Employment outcomes have stood still and, in fact, in some places gone backwards. Through the review, there is a new focus on NDIS plans delivering outcomes, and that if you deliver outcomes, you should target greater employment. That hasn't been the focus of the last 10 years, and this is a recalibration to say, let's fund around outcomes. Again, that's something I've called for, delighted to see.
And people might go, oh, this is such an economic look at what should be a social scheme, but a lot of people want a job. It's a huge benefit to them in so many different ways. So it's a good outcome for the person too, not just the economy.
There's 255,000 people with a disability looking for work today.
It's a really high figure, isn't it?
Spot on, Tom.
Martin Laverty, appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're most welcome.